There's another body cam footage that hasn't been released, and it has some pretty graphic details, and I can hear my son screaming, and it's something I don't really want to care to listen to again.
Whatever you talking about, the mother, hey, you mother, I don't give a whatever you talking about, the mother, lie, hey, you don't.
Why you think they won't show you the video, Loon? They keep showing you grainy videos when you had witnesses out there who said a lot of people videotaped the situation. Most of the kids under the tent taped the case. Loon, they taped it. Why did we never see the clear video?
One push, one knife, one life gone. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, a resource officer, who was supposed to be watching, wasn't even at the stadium. In my last video on this case, we broke down and analyzed the body cam and surveillance footage that dropped after 14 months. A lot of you said it changed how you saw things. One viewer wrote, "After watching the new Karmelo Anthony footage, I realize now how wrong I was." Another asked the question that has been sitting with me ever since. I want to know who was supposed to be working security that let Karmelo Anthony bring in the knife. That question is what this entire video is built around. That question stuck with me, because this case is not only about what happened under that tent, it's also about everything that happened before the moment the knife came out, the decisions, the conditions, and the gaps in security that may have shaped how this tragedy unfolded. Because here's something most of the coverage hasn't told you, but I'm going to tell you. After this happened, Frisco ISD made major changes to how these events were secured. They moved future meets, added metal detectors, and increased law enforcement presence. But the question is, why did those protections come after Austin Metcalf was already gone? Think about what that tells you. We're going to come back to it. Karmelo Anthony is now serving up to 35 years for the murder of Austin Matthew Metcalf. His legal team is fighting the conviction, and the court has now released rare new surveillance and body cam footage the public had never fully seen before. I've watched all of it, and the more you look at it, the harder it becomes to separate what Karmelo did from what was, and wasn't, in place around him that morning. This isn't just a story about one teenager's decision. It's a story about everything that had to go wrong for that decision to even become possible. Quick note before we go further. This video covers the death of a high school student and includes real courtroom evidence and emotional statements from both families. Please take care while watching. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We follow the evidence beyond the headlines, breaking down the footage, the courtroom decisions, and the unanswered questions that shape these cases. And with this story still developing, you'll want to be here when the next piece of the puzzle comes out. Let's get into it. This is Kuykendall Stadium on the morning of April 2nd, 2024. Look at it. Rain coming down across the whole field. Athletes from multiple schools packed under tents, waiting out the delay. Every team out there has a tent, except one. Centennial High School, Karmelo's team, never set theirs up. His teammates first tried sheltering in the baseball dugout until a coach there told them to leave. When the rain picked back up, Karmelo headed toward the Memorial High School tent, where a student named Eddie Parra, someone he already knew, waved him over. The two of them talked for several minutes. No tension, no trouble, nothing that looked like the beginning of anything. I want to stop here because this detail matters, and I'm not going to leave it out. Karmelo's own track coach testified that Anthony was supposed to be out on the field that morning helping the JV team, not in the stands at all. That was a decision Karmelo made. We're telling this story honestly, and that means including the parts that complicate it. But here's the thing about teenagers at school events. They move around. They look for shelter from the rain. They end up places they weren't technically assigned to be. And that happens at school events across the country every single day, without it ever leading anywhere near tragedy. The question isn't whether teenagers wander. Of course they do. The question is whether the adults running a large event like this had any system in place to manage that. That day, there wasn't much of a system at all. No bag checks at the entrance, no metal detectors, no staff specifically assigned to walk the tent area during the weather delay. Whatever supervision existed was happening informally. One coach here, one there, with no single coordinated plan for the whole event. And here's the part that doesn't get said enough. The Frisco ISD school resource officer assigned to that event wasn't even at the stadium when the stabbing happened. He was at a nearby middle school. When the call came in, he had to run over. The first adult to actually reach that tent after the stabbing was a coach from a completely different school, standing 20 feet away, who heard the chaos and ran toward it. Not the person whose job it was to be there. A confrontation like this one had almost nothing standing in its way. No checkpoint, no supervisor, no coordinated plan for keeping rival schools separated during a 2-hour rain delay. The absence of all of that wasn't background noise in this story. It was the condition that made everything else possible. So keep that picture in your mind as we watch what the new footage shows. Hundreds of teenagers, 2 schools worth of tents, standing right next to each other. Very little coordinated adult oversight of any of it. And then, inside that Memorial High School tent, the conversation turns. Austin Metcalf and his twin brother Hunter told Karmelo he needed to leave. It was their team's tent. Karmelo didn't move. According to multiple witnesses, he was asked to leave more than once. Some accounts say as many as 15 times. And no adult with real authority was anywhere near that tent to step in and shut it down before it turned physical. Now I need to explain something about the law here, because this is where the case gets complicated, and I want to make sure you actually understand it, not just feel like you do. Texas law, like most states, allows you to defend yourself if you're genuinely threatened. But that right has a limit. Lawyers call it proportionality. Your response has to reasonably match the level of danger you're actually facing. In plain terms, if someone pushes you, the law generally expects your response to stay in that range, not escalate into something far more lethal. Defense attorney Randy Zellen put it simply when he reviewed this footage. Putting your hands on me doesn't give me the right to stab you. That is meeting non-deadly force with deadly force.
My name is Randy Zellen. I am a criminal defense attorney. I have been practicing for 38 years. I am a former prosecutor, and I have been an adjunct professor at Cornell University School of Law. If I use deadly force on someone, if I kill someone, and my defense is self-defense or justification, the jury has to be not convinced, if you will, by the government that I acted reasonably, that I reasonably believed that I was about to be killed. And as a result of that reasonable belief that I was about to be killed, I killed first. I killed in self-defense. Touching someone is not deadly force. You cannot meet deadly force. You cannot stab someone in the chest and kill them because they touch you.
That one sentence is the heart of this entire case. A push, even a forceful one, even from someone bigger, is what the law considers non-deadly force. A knife to the chest is deadly force. For a self-defense claim to hold up, the jury has to believe the response matched the threat. Here, they didn't. Now, that doesn't make this an easy call. Fear is real. In a sudden, chaotic moment, people don't think through legal definitions. The defense argued that Karmelo, frightened and reacting to what they called a split second of fear and chaos, genuinely believed he needed to protect himself. The jury heard that argument. They didn't dismiss it because it was unreasonable to raise. They rejected it because, after looking at the footage, the timing, and the testimony, they didn't believe the facts actually supported it. Legal analyst Jesse Weber, reviewing this same footage, said something that stuck with me. I don't look at this and say, oh my gosh, I don't understand how Anthony was convicted. But it definitely humanizes this. It puts a face on this. It's incredibly tragic. Incredibly tragic. That's where most people who have looked closely at this case end up landing, regardless of which side they started on. Understanding someone's fear is not the same as excusing what they did with it. Now I want to slow down on one detail that got lost in a lot of the coverage, because it goes to the heart of the security argument more than anything else in this case. According to the documented timeline, Here is how the confrontation actually started. Austin Metcalf spotted Karmelo under his team's tent and told him to relocate and sit with his own team. When Karmelo refused, Austin grabbed or pushed him. That's when the knife came out. Read that sequence again. A 17-year-old boy, sitting under his own team's tent, told an uninvited student to leave, multiple times. And when words didn't work, he made it physical. I'm not saying that push was the right call. The law doesn't excuse Austin's shove any more than it excuses Karmelo's knife. But here's what that sequence tells you about the security environment that morning. Austin Metcalf was essentially doing the job that a supervising adult should have been doing. He was the one enforcing the boundary. He was the one trying to manage a situation that no adult with authority had stepped in to handle. Across 15 requests to leave, across 2 full minutes of escalating tension, across a rain delay at a UIL championship event with hundreds of teenagers. That's the whole story in one sentence. A 17-year-old boy died trying to enforce a boundary that the adults running that event never enforced for him. With no one watching the tents, and no one enforcing who belonged where, this argument was never going to stay contained. The lack of structure didn't just make escalation possible. It removed the one thing that might have stopped it. One adult, with real authority, willing to step between 2 17-year-olds before it went too far. So what does the new CCTV actually show when that moment arrives? The argument reached its breaking point. Austin pushed Karmelo. What had been a verbal disagreement turned physical. And in that moment, Karmelo reached into his bag. One knife, one motion, a single strike to the chest. Look at that footage. It's a wide shot from across the stadium. Grainy, not the close-up graphic evidence a lot of people were expecting. But the shape of what happens is unmistakable. Sudden movement under the tent. A reaction. Students scattering in every direction. Then one figure, Karmelo, pulling away and running up the bleachers. That push, which witnesses described as a single firm shove rather than several people attacking him at once, was the moment everything changed. A disagreement over tent space ended a young man's life in seconds. I want to be precise about the knife, because there's been a lot of speculation online. Court evidence described it as a gray-handled utility knife with a blade of about 3.5 inches, a basic folding tool some people carry in a backpack. Whatever its original purpose, it was used as a weapon, and there was nothing in place at that event to have caught it beforehand. No bag check, no metal detector, nothing screening what students brought into that tent area. Now watch the timestamp. From the moment Austin pushes Karmelo to the moment Karmelo breaks away and runs, 2 to 3 seconds. 2 to 3 seconds. The prosecution leaned hard on that number. Because you don't process a shove, register real fear, reach into a bag, find a knife, pull it out, and strike, all in 2 to 3 seconds, unless that knife was already easy to reach. The defense pushed back. They argued that real fear doesn't need 3 full seconds to take hold. That a split-second panic reaction is exactly how a frightened teenager actually responds. The jury heard both arguments. But one question that verdict doesn't answer at all is this. How did a weapon get that close to a crowd of students with no screening process in place? That's a question about the event, not about Karmelo. And it's the one the media has mostly ignored. The new footage shows what happens right after. Karmelo running, tripping on the wet bleachers, getting back up, continuing along the edge of the track. The knife left behind at the scene. You can see how alone that moment was. A 17-year-old running from what he'd just done, with no one positioned nearby to stop him immediately, because the people whose job it was to be positioned weren't there. The body cam picks up shortly after. By this point, coaches and bystanders are holding him. Not security, coaches, because they were the ones close enough to act. He's visibly shaken. He keeps repeating that Austin put his hands on him. He asks if Austin is going to be okay. Then comes the moment that became the center of this entire trial. An officer refers to him as the alleged suspect, and Karmelo corrects him. I'm not alleged. I know how it goes. I did it.
And they're currently treating the victim. Again, he's on the north end of the stadium. The alleged suspect.
Okay. I am. No, I'm not. I know how it goes. I'm not alleged. I did. Okay.
I've watched that exchange probably a dozen times now, and I still don't know exactly what to do with it. Prosecutors called it a clean, voluntary admission. A teenager, moments after the stabbing, no lawyer present, no coaching, stating plainly what happened. The defense saw it differently. A traumatized kid in shock, blurting out raw honesty, not making a calculated legal statement. Randy Zellin, the defense attorney we heard from earlier, didn't even focus on what that moment proved about guilt. He focused on what it meant for legal strategy. At the risk of sounding like a Monday morning quarterback, what the hell were you thinking when you chose to take this case to trial? This case should have never gone to trial. That's not a declaration of innocence. That's one experienced defense attorney, after the fact, saying the evidence was so strong that a negotiated plea might have been the smarter call. That's how seriously this moment weighed on the case. Watching that body cam sequence doesn't give you easy answers. It gives you context. A teenager who made a devastating choice. A system that wasn't watching when it should have been. Both of those things, sitting right next to each other in the same 90-second clip. While this footage was being released, the media did what it often does. It picked a lane and stayed there. Some outlets leaned hard into Karmelo's background, his talent, his family's fight. Others turned Austin into a symbol for a much bigger cultural argument that had little to do with the actual evidence. Both sides used real facts. Both bent them to fit a story they'd already decided to tell. And almost nobody asked the question sitting right there in the footage. How does a school event run for 2 hours, in a known weather delay, with hundreds of teenagers from rival schools packed together, and have no resource officer on site, and nothing screening what students brought in? That's the story the louder narratives buried. I'm not telling you which outlet to trust. I'm telling you to look at more than one. Notice which ones actually engaged with the security question, and which ones ran straight to outrage. The difference tells you everything about what those outlets are actually trying to do. On April 9, 2026, 1 year and 1 week after Austin Metcalf was killed, Frisco ISD held their district track meet again. They moved it to Lobo Stadium in Little Elm, not Kuykendall, a completely different venue. Metal detectors at every entrance. Strict safety protocols across the board. Athletes from Frisco Memorial competing under the motto A11 in honor of Austin, whose number was 11. That motto says more about what Austin Metcalf meant to his school than any press statement ever could. His teammates showed up. They competed. They wore it. Meanwhile, outside the Collin County Courthouse on the day of sentencing, large crowds had gathered on both sides. The sheriff's department made 2 arrests, one for public intoxication, one on an outstanding warrant for unlawful carrying of a weapon, at a sentencing hearing in a case about a weapon brought to a school event. Let that land for a second. Both families have been living under harassment since this went national. The Anthony family was forced to relocate to an undisclosed location after receiving death threats. The Metcalf family endures ongoing online threats and random swatting at their home. The judge who reduced Karmelo's bond during the pretrial period was doxxed. Her home address posted publicly on social media, even though Texas law specifically protects judges' private information. This is what this case became in the public sphere. 2 families trying to survive their grief, buried under a national debate that often had nothing to do with either of them. Community advocate Bruce Carter, who stayed in contact with Jeff Metcalf throughout the trial, put it plainly after the verdict. I hate to see a 17-year-old lose his life, and I hate to see a 17-year-old lose his freedom, but this is where we are. And so the question becomes, what do we go from here? That question doesn't have a clean answer, but it's the right one to be asking. This case isn't over, and that's a fact, not a dramatic claim. Karmelo Anthony's legal team filed a notice of appeal less than 24 hours after the verdict. Since then, a group of civil rights and criminal defense attorneys, including the president of the Texas Knockup, have joined his case, representing him without charge through the appeals process. So what does an appeal actually do? Because this gets misunderstood constantly. An appeal does not retry the facts. A jury already decided what happened under that tent. Appeals courts don't re-examine that evidence or second-guess the jury's judgment on guilt. Instead, they ask one much narrower question. Was the trial itself conducted the way the law requires? One issue expected to be central involves jury selection. There were no black jurors on the 12-person panel that decided this case, even though black candidates had made it through the early rounds. Prosecutors used their strikes to remove the final 3. Anthony's attorneys raised a Batson challenge, a legal objection named after a Supreme Court case that exists specifically to stop attorneys from removing jurors because of their race. Prosecutors said those 3 jurors were struck for a race-neutral reason. They all worked as educators of school-aged children, and the state believed that profession could shape how someone viewed a case built around a school event. The judge accepted that explanation and denied the challenge. Whether that holds up under appeal is now a real legal question, and I want to be honest with you about the odds. Appeals based on this kind of jury selection argument are historically very difficult to win. Courts typically give a lot of weight to the trial judge's in-the-moment read on whether a stated reason was genuine. That doesn't mean this appeal has no chance. It means the bar is high. It's also entirely possible, under how our legal system actually works, for someone to be guilty of a crime and still have a legitimate claim that part of their trial wasn't conducted fairly. Those are 2 different questions, even though from the outside, they tend to blur into one larger story about whether justice was done. The process will take roughly 18 months, maybe longer, and none of it brings Austin back. In the Collin County Courthouse, the room went quiet as Austin's father stood to speak. No notes, just a father, looking at the person who took his son's life. Jeff Metcalf has spoken publicly several times about what this loss has done to his family. He said he has forgiven Karmelo, not for Karmelo's benefit, he's explained, but for his own peace of mind, so that anger doesn't take over what's left of his life. But he has been equally clear that forgiveness doesn't mean he disagrees with the verdict. That poor boy is fixing to experience a life that I would not wish upon anyone, but he deserves what he gets, because we're all responsible for our actions. That is the human weight underneath everything else in this story. Not legal arguments, not questions about event planning. A father, standing in front of the person who ended his son's life, trying to find words for something words were never built to hold. Hunter Metcalf lost his twin. Megan Metcalf lost her son. Jeff Metcalf lost the future the 2 of them were supposed to share. And on the other side of this, Karmelo Anthony's family has spoken about their own loss. A son facing decades behind bars. A family forced to relocate after death threats. A young man they describe as someone who made one devastating decision in an otherwise ordinary life. There's one more detail from this period that I think deserves to be said out loud. While Jeff Metcalf was processing the loss of his son, he found out through media reports, not a direct call, through media reports, that Frisco ISD had reached an agreement with the Anthony family, allowing Karmelo to receive his high school diploma despite facing a murder charge. Karmelo had a 3.7 GPA and had completed his graduation requirements before the arrest. He didn't walk the stage, but he got the diploma. Jeff Metcalf drove to Frisco ISD's administration building to confront the superintendent directly. He was told he couldn't come in without an appointment. A father of a murdered child turned away at the door of the school district that ran the event where his son was killed. That image tells you something about how accountability has worked in this case from the very beginning. Both of these families belong in this story. Neither erases the other, and that's the part that makes this case so genuinely hard to sit with, no matter where you land on it. Now let's come back to what Frisco ISD did once public attention turned to them, because this is where the security question becomes even harder to ignore. As we discussed earlier, the district changed its approach after the tragedy. Future events were moved, security measures were increased, and supervision procedures were tightened. And that brings us to the question at the center of this entire discussion. Why did those protections come after a 17-year-old boy was already gone? And now it goes further. The American Freedmen Legal Fund and the Freedmen Reparations Fund Trust have formally submitted a 9-page compliance and safety accountability report directly to Frisco ISD. 9 pages, covering adult supervision, safety protocols, event control, and emergency response. Their position is straightforward. The courtroom addressed individual criminal responsibility. It did not address whether the institution running that event met its own duty of care to the students competing there. That report hasn't been fully released publicly yet. The organization says they will release it once they reach their fundraising threshold. Whether that leads to real transparency remains to be seen. But here's something else worth knowing. Before the trial even started, Frisco ISD was subpoenaed by a formal court order to produce the names, dates of birth, home addresses, and parent contact information for every student-athlete from Memorial High School who attended that track meet. The district had to notify families by email and give them a window to seek protective action. Think about what that means practically. Over a year after the stabbing, the court was still building a complete picture of who was there and what they saw. The very fact that a subpoena was needed to get a full attendee list tells you something about how little centralized record-keeping existed for that event. You cannot have a proper security plan for an event if you don't have a reliable record of who attended it. Now I want to be fair here, because fairness matters on this channel. A school district isn't automatically at fault just because something terrible happened on its property. The law requires showing that the harm was foreseeable and that the institution failed to take reasonable steps available to it. Hindsight is clearer than foresight, and the law accounts for that. But that timing still raises a question that's hard to shake. When an institution overhauls its entire safety approach the moment something tragic happens, you're allowed to wonder why those changes weren't already in place. This isn't about pointing fingers for its own sake. It's a fair question. Does a school district's responsibility to its students end once the criminal trial wraps up? Or is there a separate, ongoing duty to honestly look at what allowed a tragedy like this to happen in the first place? So where does all of this leave us? 2 families permanently changed. 1 young man gone. Another facing decades behind bars. Karmelo Anthony swung the knife. Nothing changes that. The jury heard everything, weighed the self-defense claim against what Texas law actually requires, and came back unanimous. 35 years. But the conditions at that track meet are what made the knife reachable, the confrontation unsupervised, and the outcome, in hindsight, close to inevitable. 2 failures happened that day. One made in a single second under that tent. One that had been building for years in how that event was run. Both of them cost Austin Metcalf his life. We can hold all of that at the same time. Karmelo is legally responsible. The jury decided that. His appeal will test whether the trial was conducted fairly. A separate, narrower legal question that has nothing to do with guilt. And the conditions at that event raise a third question entirely. Whether an institution did enough to prevent a risk that may have been foreseeable. 3 different questions, 3 different answers, none of them canceling the others out. If there's one thing worth taking from this case, personal responsibility matters, and so does basic structure at school events. Weather delays, rival schools sharing space, minimal adult oversight. That combination creates risk, even if nothing goes wrong 999 times out of 1,000. The problem is, it only takes once. The appeal will continue. The accountability report will eventually be released. None of it brings Austin back, and no amount of added security, however thorough, can undo what happened before it existed. If this video gave you something to think about, that's exactly why we make them. I'd like to hear from you in the comments. What stood out to you most? The questions about supervision that day, the legal argument around self-defense, or the appeal that's still ahead? I read every comment, and I appreciate you spending this time with us. If you haven't seen my first breakdown of this case, I covered the original body cam and surveillance footage that was released after 14 months. I'll leave that video linked, so you can watch the full timeline before we get into what's changed. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.